Chapter 21. Arrancar Infighting. He turned his head and scanned the gathered Arrancar, his gaze finally settling on Luby. Yo. Luby, you've got some nerve. You actually think you can take my place? Grimjo's face twisted into a snarl. His eyes cut like blades. Killing intent rose from him like a living thing. Although he was only the Sexta Espada, his ambition was huge and his pride unmatched. He often flouted Aizen's orders. Grimjo had been watching in silence, annoyed by the stream of lowly Shinigami appearing on the lists, but confident he'd be featured later. He had never expected to be drawn into this now. Luby, a relatively minor presence among the around, hardly noticed, yet the idea that she might replace him was intolerable, impossible. He couldn't allow it. I must kill her. No, when did I ever say that? Luby stammered. Grimjo's murderous gaze froze the words in her throat. She trembled so hard she could scarcely breathe. This has to be a mistake, she thought frantically. I never said I wanted to be an espada. Her protests died in her chest. Fear numbed her limbs. The world contracted to the roar of Grimjo's rage. She knew his temper too well. This arrogant, battle-mad killer would show no mercy to anyone who crossed him. Tch, playing dumb, are you? Grimjo sneered. He raised his arm, palm out, and hissed, "Explain yourself now, or die." A red flash condensed in his hand, coalescing into a tyrannical, destructive light. A hollow flash. Nearby, Sailaporo watched with languid interest, a mocking smile on his face. Is he really going to blast her right there? He mused. As decisive as ever, the Panther King raised on corpses. To Sailaporo, the scene was unsurprising. Menos Gran never had the idea of comradeship. The Arrancar were here because they answered Aizen's command, not because they were united. Before Aizen's rule, slaughter and devouring among Menos Grande had been commonplace. The red light filled the inner hall, painting everything in its harsh glow. No, Luby cried, voice choked with tears. She dropped to her knees, hands clasped together, pleading, Lord Grimjo, you must be mistaken. I never meant any offense. Please, spare me. Her sobbing echoed through the empty chamber. Grimjo did not even look at her. Expressionless, he unleashed the blast. Die for me! The hollow flash struck like a verdict. Luby's wide, terrified eyes reflected the blinding light as the destructive energy consumed her. When the radiance finally subsided, nothing remained, only a scattering of ash where she had been. Trash, Grimjo spat once, and his fury cooled a fraction. Around him, the other Arrancar, including the top four Espada, kept silent, allowing the scene to unfold without interruption. In the 5th Division's underground base, Tosen Kaname, blindfolded, held a thick stack of reports and approached Aizen. Lord Aizen, the investigation is complete. It's not just us. Seirete, and even the rest of the Soul Society are showing the same transparent light screens. Aizen, calm on the surface, felt a small tremor inside. At first, he had suspected Urahara Kisuke. Only that man's intellect and resources could stage such a provocation across the Soul Reaper world. But Tosen's report made Aizen dismiss that idea. The Technology Development Bureau monitored the Soul Society in real time. Any anomaly would trigger alarms. It was unthinkable that the Bureau, or anyone else, could plaster transparent light screens across the Soul Society so quickly without causing panic that the Captain Commander would never allow. Ichimaru Gin, leaning back with his trademark sly smile, rubbed his hands together. If the reports are accurate, the situation in Huecomundo should be the same, right? He purred. Aizen met him without expression. Gin, what do you think? As the general officer in Huecomundo, I know the Arrancar, Ichimaru said, eyes glittering. Given Grimjo's personality, after seeing a scene like that, he'd almost certainly kill Luby on the spot. This, Gin concluded with a hiss of amusement, is clear infighting. Chapter 22. Lord Halibel, crush him. Meanwhile, the compiled footage kept playing. The fight between Toshiro and Luby continued unabated. Clang, metals struck metal. Encased in blue ice crystals, Daiguren Hyorinmaru met Luby's writhing octopus tentacles and forced them aside, frost and cold air roaring. Toshiro planted his feet and held his Zanpakuto in one hand, his ice wings beating steadily. Arrancar, I've already studied your moves. Those piercing strikes won't work on me anymore, he said with quiet confidence. Humph. Don't get cocky. The fight's only just started. Luby hissed, hatred and venom glinting in her eyes as she tightened her grip and sprang back into the fray. Aside from the initial sneak attack she'd pulled off by using the advantage of her many tentacles to confuse him, Tushiro had dodged every strike since. In this fight, she was clearly at a disadvantage. "No, you're overthinking this," she snarled. Tushiro tilted his head up a fraction, planted both hands on the hilt of his Zanpakuto, and poured an enormous amount of Reiatsu into it. Luby's face drained of color. She instinctively drew her 8 tentacles back. Tushiro's move felt like a tangible threat. "It's useless. Stop struggling. The moment you went on the defensive, you sealed your fate," Tushiro declared, holding the icy blade aloft. He swung Daiguren Hyorin Maru, and a monstrous wave of cold hurled into the sky. Crack! 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 The sky whitened as moisture in the air condensed at once. From a distance, it looked like a doomsday painting, thousands of miles of frost. Senin Hyoro, the Millennium Ice Prison. Before Luby could react, the freezing air coalesced, using the ambient moisture as a medium to form pillar after pillar of ice. No, too late to dodge, Luby gritted her teeth, but every escape route was cut off by the forming prison. Worse, her proud weapons, those huge barbed octopus tentacles, turned into liabilities, conducting the cold and giving it a direct path into her body. "Damn it! I am an Espada! How could I lose to a brat like you?" she spat, but her words stiffened on her lips as the cold seized her. When the ice pillars finished their formation, Luby's Resurrection body was encased completely in the Millennium Ice Prison. For a moment, her fate, alive or dead, was unknown. 10th Division Barracks. "Captain, that was amazing. You wiped out that Arankar so cleanly." Matsumoto Ranjiku cheered, her golden hair falling in waves as she grinned like an excited older sister. Tushiro lifted his chin, proud. He was young, talented, and to demonstrate Hyorin Maru's power in front of everyone felt satisfying. Then, with a small hesitance, Ranjiku added, "But to be fair, that Arankar who called herself the 6th Espada didn't even seem like an Ajuchas. Compared to Captain Kuchiki's footage, it's not quite as convincing." The implication was clear. Based on this clip alone, there was no reason Tushiro should rank ahead of Kuchiki Byakuya. Tushiro stiffened. He sighed and admitted, reluctantly, "Yeah, Ranjiku, you're right. Judging just from the footage, I am behind Kuchiki Byakuya." He scowled at himself, the tsundere in him reluctant to concede the point. Visually, Daiguren Hyorin Maru's ability to freeze the sky and control the weather was spectacular, but the enemy's life level made the difference. A Jillian versus an Ajukas, a gulf between them. Byakuya clearly had the edge. Ranjiku stepped closer and patted his shoulder. "Don't be discouraged. The ranking isn't over yet. You might have even more incredible performances ahead." His spirits lifted. Tushiro squared his shoulders and clenched a fist. "Right. The ranking isn't finished. I'll keep showing everyone what I can do." Human World, Urahara Shop. Kurosaki Isshin watched the screen, a relieved smile on his face as he saw Tushiro fanning out those ice crystal wings. He'd rushed over after his call with Urahara Kisuke and arrived not long before the 3rd ranking began. As Tushiro's former captain and the one who guided him into becoming a Shinigami, Isshin was proud to see his pupil on the list. Hyorin Maru's Bankai? I expected great things. In just over a decade, little Tushiro has come a long way. "I knew I had a good eye," Isshin said, chest puffed out. Urahara's teasing voice came from behind him. "No doubt, but don't you think something's missing?" Isshin's grin faded. "Just this battle footage isn't convincing enough. If he's going to be ranked above me and Kuchiki Byakuya, he should have at least killed an Ajukas, maybe even a Vasto Lord-level Menos Grande." Urahara nodded gravely. Even he didn't fully approve of Tushiro surpassing such veterans based only on this fight. Then, the screen cut from the frozen silence around Luby to a new scene. The sky above Karakura town had filled with dark clouds, cold currents surged through the air. Tushiro remained in Bankai, but his expression had gone hard, serious. In a low voice he said, "With your level of power, are you only ranked 3rd? The camera pulled back, and through Tushiro's words it focused on his opponent. The next shot revealed another imposing figure, the 3rd Espada, Tia Halabel. Hueco Mundo, Las Noches. At the sight of Halabel, the dead hush in Las Noches snapped into excitement. The Arankar army stirred, their voices rising with expectation. "Finally, the top 4 Espada are here. Now it's our turn to fight back. Lady Halabel, crush him." On the left-hand staircase, Sun Sun pumped her fist and practically vibrated with anticipation. As one of Halabel's fraction, she had longed for this. Halabel was not a weakling like Luby. She was one of the few Vasto Lord in Hueco Mundo, a Menos Grande with the highest life level. Sun Sun's eyes fixed on Toshiro. She bared her teeth and taunted, "Shinigami, just wait. Your proud freezing power won't mean a thing against Lady Halabel." Enthusiasm swept through the Arankar ranks. Even the other Espada watched eagerly. High above on the throne steps, Baragan narrowed his eyes. The enemy had just gone from a Jillian to a Vasto Lord, a contrast that felt extreme. But the footage up to that point had been so vivid, the spiritual pressures and realistic combat so convincing, that even he no longer doubted it had truly happened. When Halabel appeared, the Skull Emperor grew even more puzzled. Could that inexperienced freezing brat really grow into someone who could stand against a Vasto Lord one day? From their first battle, he had seemed far from that. Baragan was not the only one with doubts. Nearby, Neutra lounged against his scythe, scowling. "What's this? Another woman? How annoying," he muttered, though a flicker of apprehension crossed his eyes. No matter how much he despised women, he couldn't help but be curious and uneasy about Halabel. Could that white-haired kid actually beat Halabel, he wondered. Across from them, Halabel rose from her seat, flanked by her 3 fraction. Her explosive figure, no less striking than Matsumoto Rangiku's, was framed by crossed arms. She stared at the projection with cool intensity, emerald eyes glinting with confidence. "I should be able to crush him easily," she thought. In the 5th Division's underground chamber, Ichimaru Gin watched with exaggerated delight but genuine shock. "Oh my, look! Karakura Town. I never thought Halabel would face Toshiro here," he said, eyelids half closed in astonishment. The sight of a Vasto Lord, a Shinigami captain, and Karakura Town all appearing together in the same scene was staggering even for him. A decisive battle, the idea flashed into his mind. Aizen watched in silence. The scene stirred something he had not felt in a long time, surprise, and beneath it, unease. For nearly a century, he had pulled strings from the shadows and kept the situation tightly controlled. Now he felt it slipping, evolving in directions he couldn't entirely predict. It was a disquieting premonition he had not expected. "Jin, you're right," Aizen said quietly. "These images are unexpected." "What if," Jin blurted, leaning forward, "the result repeats itself and Halabel is defeated?" Aizen frowned. He had never considered that outcome. Toshiro was gifted and wielded the strongest ice-type Zanpakuto, but promise didn't equal present power. Improvement in the Soul Society took years. Perhaps a decade more of training would be required before Toshiro could truly contend with someone like Halabel. "Still," Aizen said after a moment, regaining his composure, "I believe one of the top 3 Espada won't disappoint." No sooner had he spoken than the scene resumed. Halabel's voice, hollow and deep like the rumble before a tsunami, cut through the air. "My power? I don't remember showing you my limits." She slowly pulled down the collar that masked her mouth, revealing the number 3 engraved beneath her collarbone. Then, sonido. She moved so fast the camera couldn't keep up. Golden hair flashed, and a massive golden slash expanded before Toshiro's eyes. He didn't react in time. The slash came down from above like a guillotine. Despite Toshiro's desperate attempt to hold Daiguren Hyorinmaru in front of him, the difference in Reiatsu and the downward momentum sent him and his sword crashing to the ground. He groaned, dragged across the earth, and plowed through a dozen buildings, leaving a dark fissure in his wake before finally slamming into the ruins. Aizen relaxed and allowed himself a small, satisfied murmur. "Gin, it seems you worried for nothing. The Espada lived up to expectations." Chapter 24. Reversal? Hyoten Hyakaso. Powerful, confident. Halabel hovered in the air, proud and untroubled. She looked down with the calm indifference of someone who considered victory a foregone conclusion. Even after severely wounding Toshiro with a single strike, she felt no excitement. To her, the strong defeating the weak was simply natural. Toshiro lay in the crack he'd carved, blood soaking his left shoulder where his captain's haori had been torn away. The wound gushed steadily, staining the ground red. Dirt smeared his once pristine face. He panted, the confidence he'd shown against Luby gone, replaced by a tight, suffocating terror. "He's too fast. I couldn't even react," he thought through ragged breaths. In Hueco Mundo, Las Noches erupted in renewed jubilation. Seeing the stark contrast between Toshiro's ruined state and Halibel's dominance, the previously dispirited Arrancar swelled with disdain for the Shinigami and renewed confidence in themselves. Humph, delightful. Who said Arrancar are inferior to Shinigami? The Arrancar who showed up before were just weak. Sun crowed, practically bouncing with excitement. Though she hadn't personally struck the blow, she reveled in the outcome, her earlier gloom replaced by arrogance. From the eastern staircase, Yami, silent until now, scowled. Sun, what are you implying? That I'm trash too? He snapped, more frustrated than the others. Chapter 24, Section 24. By the time of the first round of the inventory, he had already been reduced to little more than a foil to showcase Urahara Kisuke's strength, beaten black and blue by the shopkeeper. After that, Yami withdrew. He kept a brooding expression and watched in silence, patiently waiting. Even when Zomari was instantly cut down by Kuchiki Byakuya in the second round, his fate had been no kinder. But Zomari's personality wasn't as hot-headed. Though displeased by the news of his death, he accepted it without exploding. Only Yami couldn't let it go. He had waited until now in the hope of witnessing Luby finally fall to Hyorin Maru. He'd thought that with Luby gone, he wouldn't be so embarrassed anymore. But then, after the spoilers flashed across the screen, Grimjo suddenly went berserk and killed Luby without warning. Back to square one. Among the Arrancar, only he, Yami, continued to be toyed with by the Shinigami. Sun's words hit him like a spark. Yami, full of pent-up fury, erupted like a powder keg. What? I didn't even say any names, so don't jump to conclusions. Sun hid behind Halibel, relying on her power and sneering at him. Yami stomped in rage. If not for his respect for Halibel's strength, he would have shredded Sun long ago. But as the two of them bickered, the camera cut away, the scene flashed, and the view fast-forwarded to another stage. Thunder cracked. Dark clouds hid the sky and roared with lightning. Beneath that dome of vapor, Tushiro spread his ice wings like a child of the storm, a pale glow wrapping his wounded body. As water vapor gathered, the wings swelled in size and length until they stretched to cover the sky. Every flap seemed to whip up a hurricane of absolute cold. Tushiro's spiritual pressure shot to its peak, a terrifying intensity. What did he do? Why does his pressure feel as strong as Captain Halibel's? Sun's dry skin prickled, large patches of goosebumps raised as the chill cut to the bone, as if her blood itself were freezing. Something's wrong, Neutra said, pupils widening. Even a brute who relied on sheer slashing could feel the danger in Tushiro's energy. It was like the first tremor before an avalanche, small at first, then catastrophic collapse. Halibel felt it most keenly. Her power over ocean currents complements and contests the power of freezing. As the sky's moisture gathered toward Tushiro, unease tightened in her. What came next made that unease rage. Halibel, right? Tushiro said, gripping his sword with both hands. White light wrapped him. His voice dropped to the cold of the air itself, chilling to the bone. My Zanpakuto, Hyorin Maru, is the strongest ice-type Zanpakuto. It can turn all the moisture in the air into a weapon. Halibel held steady. Ocean currents poured from her sharkskin broadsword, dispersing the encroaching cold. Tenso Jurin is one of Hyorin Maru's basic abilities, Tushiro continued. It lets me control climate and every drop of moisture in the air. White hair whipped around him as crystal frost formed across his body. His spiritual pressure, peaking, condensed into a pillar of white light that shot into the clouds. The air condensed into ice at the zenith. Tushiro roared, Hyoten Hyakaso. He swung his Zanpakuto with a furious cry. A blinding white beam raced up the blade and into the clouds. The sky split open, and billions of ice flowers burst into being, filling the heavens. Their shadows blanketed almost all of Karakura town. The sight was apocalyptic, enough to make anyone's scalp prickle. Chapter 25. Aizen panicked. Plans changed. Hyoten Hyakaso. Tushiro stared at the transparent screen in the 10th Division barracks, trembling with exhilaration. He had feared being suppressed by Halibel and struck down from the sky, certain he would die. Instead, the battle had turned. When he thought he had no options left, his hidden ultimate move had revealed itself. How amazing, he breathed, to control the sky and bend such vast natural power to your will. Matsumoto Rangiku covered her mouth, eyes wide as the falling frost reflected in them. It was hard to imagine what would happen when so many ice flowers descended at once. Surely Halibel's domain would suffer. In the First Division's ancient squad room, the captain commander watched the chaotic sky with his usual measured gaze, but even he allowed a rare note of surprise. Is this Hyorinmaru's true power? It lives up to the name of the strongest. Chojiro Sasakibe, watching intently, couldn't hide his excitement. His Zanpakuto Gonyomaru was one of the few in the Gotei 13 with the power to influence climate, one of the only others rivaling Hyorinmaru. Seeing the sky turn pure white, his blood burned. In the 11th Division, the fighters were equally stunned. "This is incredible," someone exclaimed. "I never thought Captain Hitsugaya, so young, could wield such force." Ikaku Madarame's throat tightened as he watched. He instinctively reached for his waist, hand brushing Hozukimaru. Though officially only a seated officer, he had secretly mastered Bankai and kept it hidden so he could continue following Kenpachi. The sight on the screen stirred him deeply. Ikaku Madarame couldn't help but whisper with a hunger in his voice, "One day, my Bankai will surely grow this much too." At that moment, everyone watching was frozen in shock. On the screen, Halibel's figure was almost swallowed by shadow. Cold air poured down around her, and even the sero that clung to her body began to falter. It slowly lost cohesion. "Damn it, my abilities being completely suppressed." Halibel stared at her shark-patterned broadsword as frost formed along its edge. For the first time in a long while, the emerald in her eyes betrayed doubt and anxiety. Before she could steady herself, a cold voice came from above the crystalline canopy of ice. "Espada, it's too late to react now." With the voice came the accelerating fall of pure ice and snow. Hundreds of frost flowers locked onto Halibel, ready to blossom. "Freeze me? How naive," she snarled. Halibel swung her broadsword wide and unleashed a tsunami-like surge of scorching oceanic currents straight into the sky. But nothing changed. The furious flood was swallowed before it could reach Toshiro. Mottled white spots latched onto the current, freezing and congealing at mid-ascent until it shattered into hundreds of ice pillars that rose up like a frozen forest. How is this possible?" Her pupils widened as panic took over. A shark that loses the currents it needs to live faces only one fate: sacrifice. As one of the top 3 Espada, Halibel now found herself paying that price for the glory of the Arrancar. "It's over." Toshiro's voice, cold and unyielding, seemed to pronounce the sentence. "Next, you'll be trapped in an ice sculpture, helpless as your subordinates fall one by one." As if on cue, the frost exploded outward, one radiant ice flower after another, enveloping Halibel. She had nowhere to go. The cold descended and settled on her. Ice blooms formed over her body, crystals stacking in midair like a solemn, frozen funeral. In the underground base, everyone watched the screen in stunned silence. Halibel was actually taken down? Ichimaru Gin stared at the Senin Hyoro on the display, his eyes scanning every frame. When the camera lingered on Halibel, trapped in the ice, her face empty and unreadable, Jin's shock slipped into something deeper. He hadn't expected to see a third Espada, a Vasto Lord, fallen so cleanly. Aizen's expression darkened. As the ruler of Huecomundo, he knew the Espada's powers intimately. Halibel's scorching oceanic currents had once seemed the perfect counter to Hyorinmaru. On sheer Reiatsu alone, a Vasto Lord like her should have crushed Toshiro. Yet the footage told a different story. The result lay entirely outside Aizen's expectations. The mood in the base turned oppressive and heavy, the air closing in. Even Jin, usually quick with a sardonic remark, fell silent. Tosen Kaname, standing behind them, trembled as he watched Aizen's back. Both he and Gin felt the subtle shift in their leader. With the Arrancar falling one after another, Aizen appeared to be recalculating everything. Karakura town outskirts, an abandoned warehouse. Inside, a small group gathered around a screen. "Ah, it's finally over." Hirako Shinji dropped lightly from the rafters and landed beside the monitor, exhaling a genuine sigh. "Hyorinmaru, I have to admit, this Zanpakuto truly deserves its reputation as the strongest ice type. That climatic control, it's got endless growth potential." He fell quiet, then grew serious. Though he liked to play things easy, the decisive clash between Toshiro and Halibel had impressed him. "I didn't expect this generation of captains to be so strong. I thought they'd be third-rate, but..." Kensei Mugaruma, broad-shouldered and still proud of his era, nodded. Long accustomed to looking down on the current captains, Kensei found his prejudices softening after watching the fight. "Wait, you two baldies, stop right there." Hiyori Saragaki's voice cracked like a whip as she stormed in, hands on her hips, cheeks flushed with annoyance. "Hirako, Kensei, stop hyping them up and making us look bad. That short Shinigami only won because of his Zanpakuto's quirks. I don't think he's anything special." Her shrill complaint was laced with more than anger. It carried a sour envy. Toshiro's brilliant victory had clearly stung her. "Hiyori, come on, we're just talking," Hirako said, holding up his hands. He stared at her freckled, angry face for a beat, then conceded, "But you do have a point. Being frozen doesn't necessarily mean immediate death. That Espada might still be alive." He replayed the footage in his head. When the frost flowers burst and layered themselves, Halibel had been trapped at their center. Then the camera pulled back to a wide shot and the image blurred. Before anyone could see inside the ice sculpture clearly, the transmission cut off. So no one could be 100% sure whether Halibel was alive or dead. They could only rely on intuition. No matter what, I think the important question isn't how strong the Shinigami captains are, but rather who or what these so-called Espada are, someone muttered. A deeper voice answered. Hachigen Ushoda, the former vice-captain of the Kido Corps, walked over in his green Hiyori, frowning as he looked at the dark screen. "As far as I know, Hueco Mundo has always been a place of rampant growth. Even after hollows consume others' souls, very few Menos Grande ever manage to become self-Arrancar." "Then how do you explain this?" someone asked. "Not only have Arrancar been appearing suddenly in large numbers," Hachigen continued, "but there are even Arrancar at Vasto Lord level. He broke off, a cold sweat forming. "It's terrifying. What could have happened in Hueco Mundo to cause such a steady emergence of Arrancar?" The conversation that had been building up abruptly fell silent. Everyone's faces went pale as they stared at one another. Rohuro Otorobashi, the artist, let out a small, absurd suggestion. "You guys, could this be Aizen?" At the name, every Vizord's scalp prickled. Memories of that night 100 years ago rushed back like a Pandora's box opening. "Aizen," Hirako Shinji said, drawing a long breath. His expression hardened. If he's behind this, it's certainly possible. He was the one who understood Aizen better than most. Before the betrayal, he'd been Aizen's direct superior, and the first in the Gotei to realize Aizen had been concealing his true self. "Gods, that's terrifying," Kunomashiro whispered. "He played everyone by acting like a good guy. If Hueco Mundo is under his control too." Silence pressed down on the room. Before despair could fully settle in, the previously blank screen flickered back to life. New subtitles scrolled across it. "The Visionary, Gramithamo." "Huh? Is a new round of rankings starting?" Hirako murmured, more curious than relieved. He squinted at the unfamiliar name. "The Visionary? Gramithamo? Who is that? I don't remember anyone by that name." None of the visored recognized it. "No," several voices said, "not me." The nickname The Visionary, what kind of Shinigami would pick that? Hirako scoffed. "It sounds ridiculous." He thought for a few minutes, searching his memory for any hint of the name, but came up empty. Then a possibility occurred to him. Maybe this time there's a twist. Maybe this Visionary is an Arrancar from Hueco Mundo. "An Arrancar?" The others echoed, eyes widening. They had barely considered that the new names on the list could be from Hueco Mundo. Kensei Muguruma rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I don't like the idea, but if you frame it that way, it does make sense. We don't know what's been happening there. And the name, it does sound like something from Hueco Mundo." "Let's not jump to conclusions," Lisa Yadamaru said, pushing her glasses up with a cool air of authority. "The ranking is about to start. Let's watch." "Maybe this Visionary is some reclusive master living in the human world," Hirako joked, though his curiosity was genuine. The subtitles on the screen kept flickering, only heightening the suspense. Hueco Mundo. As the new line of subtitles appeared, the corridors of Las Noches buzzed with talk. The Visionary, Ulquiorra Cipher frowned as he read the nickname. It didn't fit. Vision? There was no place for visions among the hollows, only battle and survival. Among the Menos Grande, everything boiled down to a fight to the death. The title sounded soft, unfitting for an Arrancar's name, Ulquiorra thought of the Espada's own epithets: King of Panthers, Empress of the Sea, Holy Crying Mantis, Murcielago, Skull Emperor, titles that carried weight. The visionary was underwhelming. Grimjo Jagerjakes, not far away, slammed a fist against the wall and swore. "Damn it! Still no Arrancar on the list? What the hell is that author doing?" he roared, shaking with irritation. "If it's another Shinigami, we should figure out how to smash that light screen," Zumari Ruro suggested, irritated as well. Why should they be? Are Arrancar inherently inferior? It was infuriating. "Sailaporo, what do you think?" someone asked. The arrogant Skull Emperor, though annoyed, didn't explode this time. He merely turned to the Huecomundo scientist and asked calmly, Sailaporo rubbed his forehead and thought for a moment. Then, in his measured way, he offered a hypothesis. "From my past discussions with Aizen and the others, none of the Gotei 13 captains have ever had the epithet, the Visionary. As Huecomundo's resident scientist, Mayuri's counterpart, overseeing Las Noches' research and intelligence, Sailaporo was certain there was no captain in the Gotei 13 known by that title." Baragan's bushy brows knit in confusion. "That's strange," he muttered. "If he isn't a Shinigami captain, then who exactly is this grimy Thamo fellow?" 11th Division. Zaraki Kenpachi arched an eyebrow as he leaned over the wooden table, eyes glued to the screen. "Oh, so an Arrancar's on the list at last? That epithet is new," he said, intrigued. "I heard from the Arrancar earlier that Gramy Thamo should be the first Espada," Ikaku Madarame said excitedly. "If the third Espada, Halabel, was already Vasto Lord class, then the first ought to be even stronger." "Humph, he'd better be. If he disappoints me, I'll go to Huecomundo myself and drag him out," Zaraki sneered. The scene on the screen finally changed. The camera left Karakura town and settled on a new location, a medical bay sealed within a barrier. Asani Kotetsu, pale and trembling, stood in the room. Her wide eyes were fixed on a blonde youth sitting on the edge of a bed, hands in his pockets, his body wrapped in a white cloak. He smiled as if no one else were there, ignoring Isani's frantic warning. Who exactly are you? Please, leave that spot immediately. That's where Captain Otorobashi and Captain Muguruma's beds are." Isani pleaded. The blonde looked up slowly. "Are you worried about them?" he asked coldly. Then he rose. The camera followed his movement. In the next instant, 2 pillars of blood roared upward, splattering the medical bay in streaks and sprays, filling the air with a metallic scent. When the last drop fell, the camera panned up to the 2 bodies on the beds, Kensei Muguruma, Rogura Otorobashi. They lay dead. Their breaths had ceased. They died so suddenly that their pupils were dilated, their faces frozen in violent, convulsing death throes. Just as the blonde had said, while Asane was questioning him, he had silently used his imagination to kill the 2 captains. Human world, on the outskirts of Karakura town, inside the Vizord's hideout. The opening scene hit everyone like a bomb. The sight of the 2 captains' corpses shattered the room's composure. "Is that real or fake?" Hiyori Suragaki shrieked, staring at the screen. "Kensei, Rojuro, you too." Her voice broke. The shock made her lips tremble, and she couldn't force out the rest. Rojuro's face on the screen was a dead, cold corpse. Seeing himself like that left him staring blankly, nearly fainting. Kensei reacted differently. He roared like a madman. "Impossible! How could I die the moment I appeared? And there's no way I'd ever put on a captain's houri again and stoop to the level of those fools in the Gotei 13. He shook with anger and incredulity. The blow was too sudden. It took him time to accept what he had just seen. 4th Division Barracks. Retsu Unohana sat cross-legged before her tea table in the nicely appointed office. Her normally gentle face wore an expression of raw shock. As a former 1st Division captain and one of the long-lived captains among the Shinigami, she recognized both men on the screen, and the sight shook her just as much as it did Kensei and Rojuro. After nearly a century since they'd last met, she had not expected to see them again under such circumstances. Captain, I honestly didn't know." Asani stammered beside her, tears in her voice. She had dropped her teacup. The warm tea had splashed against her hand and face. Stunned, she stood frozen, disbelief filling her eyes. Retsu sighed softly and reached out to comfort her. "Isane, calm down. I'm not accusing you of anything." "But," Isane began, only to be cut off. No more explanations. I know this is a future scene. It doesn't mean you caused it, Retsu said firmly, unusually serious. She could not bear the idea of losing former comrades. Why had Kensei and Rojuro returned to the Gotei? What kind of enemy had felled them so brutally? The questions gnawed at her. Back in the 11th Division barracks, Zaraki pushed to his feet, eyes gleaming. If I'm not mistaken, that blonde on the bed must be Graimi Tomo, right? He said, grinning with excitement at the thought of a worthy opponent. Chapter 28, Section 28. Kensei Muguruma and Rojuro Otoribashi had left the Soul Society years ago. The king of basic attacks, single-minded as ever, naturally had no time to worry about former captains, so it was no surprise he didn't recognize them. To Zaraki Kenpachi, Kensei and Rojuro were just background figures. His attention never wavered from Graimi Tomo. I'm not sure why, but this looks bad, Ikkaku Madarame said uneasily, tense and on edge. Even through the light screen, when his gaze landed on Graimi, he felt as if every pore on his skin were about to burst open. There was something about that seemingly harmless blonde youth that suggested destructive power beyond imagination. Oh no, Vice Captain Asani is in danger. Isn't there anyone else there? Hurry, help her. Yachiru, perched on Kenpachi's shoulder, clenched her small fists, anxious for Asani Kotetsu. The tender little girl's worried voice had barely left her lips when a sharp slash cut through the air. Zeng! The blow sliced fast and true, grazing Graimi Tomo's back. At the same time, a familiar figure flashed into view on the screen. Is this Yachiru? Zaraki Kenpachi, Ikkaku Madarame, and Ayasagawa Yumichika all turned toward the monitor at once, their faces draining. Yachiru, always treated like a mascot, was in the footage. The thought chilled them through and through. The more they stared, the more terrifying it became. For Kenpachi, finding Yachiru anywhere but by his side was intolerable. She wasn't just a companion, she was his Zanpakuto, a part of his power. They depended on each other and could not be separated. Seeing Yachiru venture out alone sent him into a blind, raging fury. His eyes toward the screen flashed with wildness and menace. On the video, Graimi casually turned his head, easily dodging the surprise strike. He placed a light hand on Yachiru's wrist and coldly began to speak. Imagine, he said, if the bones in your arm were as fragile as a biscuit, they'd break easily, wouldn't they? Right? When the last word left his mouth, the next scene made everyone's blood run cold. Crack! The sound of bones breaking snapped in the silent room. The arm Graimi had touched bent and twisted at an exaggerated, visible rate. The absurd, horrible sight seemed to prove what he'd said. This was the product of his imagination made real. Chapter 29, Yachiru's Life, Hanging by a Thread. Crack! Bones twisted and snapped. Under everyone's eyes, because of Graimi Tomo's casual remark, and by the force of his imagination, Yachiru's delicate arm shattered like a biscuit. Even before the pain hit her, her brain hadn't caught up. Her body continued on inertia, posture fixed as if mid-attack. It created a grotesque image. Yachiru's body leaned forward in a sword stance, while her ruined arm dangled and dragged along the ground, as if it might tear free at any moment. Anyone who saw it felt their blood run cold. 11th Division. Damn it! What the hell did that bastard do? Ikkaku's eyelids twitched. He couldn't bear to watch any longer. He clenched his fists so hard his knuckles went white, eyes blazing. Yachiru was a child, innocent and naive. For a man to lay a hand on her, and in such a bizarre, cruel way, he was worse than a dog. Sigh. Ayasagawa Yumichika's lashes fluttered, and his eyes grew dim as he sighed in pain. Even knowing it was a future scene, watching Yachiru bewildered and helpless made his heart ache. Graimi Tomo. Zaraki Kenpachi's face darkened like the prelude to a beast awakening. Reflected in his furious eyes were the images of Yachiru's injury. From them rose pure bloodlust. He tightened his grip on his Zanpakuto's hilt. Raising his chipped blade, he spat each word between clenched teeth. You lay a hand on Yachiru, and I will tear you to pieces. 2nd Division Barracks. How is it, Omaida? Have you looked into it thoroughly? Who exactly is Graimi Tomo? Suifeng demanded from behind her wooden desk. As commander-in-chief of the stealth force, she had ordered an immediate inquiry into the unfamiliar name as soon as it appeared. Captain. Omaida's face was sweat-slick and nervous. He swallowed and admitted, I'm very sorry. The stealth force has investigated. There's no one named Graimi Tomo in Seirete or Rukongai. He lowered his head, guilt making him small. The oppressive atmosphere only thickened. What? Su Feng exploded, kicking the desk over in fury. Pointing at Omaida's pig-like face, she spat curses. Mobilize everyone, and you can't even find one living person? The stealth force is useless. Her voice turned on herself in frustration. The helplessness of being forced to watch and being unable to act boiled over. 4th Division. Oh no. Retsu Unohana's pupils narrowed. As the Soul Society's foremost medical master, she could tell at a glance that Yachiru's bodily functions were collapsing. It wasn't only the arm, other bones were becoming brittle. The child's limbs went limp. Unable to support herself, she sank to her knees with a heavy thud, her body hunching. If it continued, every bone would snap until she was twisted to death. But that man didn't even touch her. Izane Kotetsu's voice was hoarse with despair, mirroring her appearance in the footage. He didn't do anything, and yet by imagination he can make things happen and kill people at will? I've never seen anything like this. It's terrifying. Retsu's expression was grave and complicated. She had lived as long as many of the old veterans and had seen countless terrible things in 2,000 years, but she had never heard of an ability like imagination that could alter reality so directly. Captain, is there truly no other way? Izan Kotetsu stood frozen, emptiness pressing behind her eyes. On the screen, Graimi Thamo had already appeared before Yachiru. Shinigami, he said. Now you should be able to feel it, right? Imagination is the most powerful force in this world. Absolutely unique. A schadenfreude smile flickered across his face. Hands shoved into his pockets, Graimi looked down at Yachiru Kusajishi, who lay collapsed with her bones shattered, her cheek pressed to the cold floor, and said coldly, "Everything I imagine becomes reality the moment I imagine it, just like, I will now imagine your death." Las Noches fell into a stunned silence. The Arrancar stared at the screen with bated breath. The scene hadn't been flashy or long. It showed little overt destruction and ended quickly. Yet that insubstantial, otherworldly imagination was conveyed perfectly through the sound of Yachiru's bones cracking, her desperate fall, and her helplessness. Even through the translucent light screen, Graimi, the lithe figure wrapped in a white cloak, imposed an indescribable pressure. Imagination. Does such a thing really exist? Ulquiorra murmured, his voice cold and edged with doubt. What he and the others knew of powers was grounded in reality. Abilities always had some connection to spiritual pressure or tangible force. Even the path of nihility required the overwhelming Ryatsu of a Vasto Lord. But Graimi had walked calmly through that encounter with his hands in his pockets. He had released no spiritual pressure, shown no physical destructive technique. He had only spoken. Could merely opening your mouth kill someone? Ulquiorra had even doubted for a moment whether the footage was genuine. Baragan watched Graimi with narrowed eyes. His aging power bore some resemblance to the idea of changing reality, but aging was observable decay. It could be measured. Imagination, bringing something into being from nothing, was utterly unpredictable and therefore far more terrifying. Graimi's open hostility toward the Shinigami and his record of defeating 3 captain-level Shinigami made it clear he was no ordinary human. Who then was he? Before any answers could form, the screen flickered and jumped to a new scene. The ground split open and rocks exploded upward. Massive stone fragments climbed, stacked, and coalesced into a square platform that rose like an arena into the clouds. From above came Graimi's mocking, cold voice. Zaraki Kenpachi, facing magma that incinerates everything and a cold snap that freezes the atmosphere, how will you respond? The scene played like a savage judgment in a hymn of fire and ice. At the right moment, a drumbeat rose, a deep, pounding rhythm that heralded the eruption. A torrent of burning magma burst from the earth, a roaring wall of heat hurtling at the camera. The Arrancar recoiled instinctively, sweating and taking a step back. Before they could even steady themselves, a freezing mist swept down from the sky, chilling the air even as it interacted with the magma and birthed a 100-meter-tall fiery tornado. Sky and ground warred, icy currents above, molten eruptions below, and the screen became saturated with destructive energy, like a vision of the world's end. Swallows echoed around the watching crowd. The arrogant, brutal Arrancar sat mute, only their throats moved. Neutra's voice came out ragged. I didn't expect him to actually be able to imagine everything. Even Neutra, who constantly boasted of being the strongest Espada, trembled at the scale of it. The four Vasto Lord-class Arrancar felt the weight of it too. Stark, normally languid and unflappable, was visibly shaken. These cold currents sweeping the sky are 10 times, if not more, stronger than the strongest ice-type Zanpakuto, he breathed. To summon such a disaster by mere imagination, is that even possible? Grammy had kept his word. The imagination he spoke of actually did things no Shinigami or Arrancar had thought possible. When the maelstrom's momentum peaked, the camera cut to the platform's center, to that beast of a figure standing there. Zaraki Kenpachi. Against the torrent of magma and ice, his 2-meter frame looked no more than a leaf on a stormy sea, ready to be crushed. Magma and freezing? Kenpachi grunted. I have to admit, your imagination's pretty flashy. High above the dome, Grammy stood like an accuser shoulder to shoulder with the sun. His white cloak whipped in the violent winds as he proclaimed his judgment. Don't be afraid. Death is nothing hard to imagine. It's only a moment. Be proud to die at the hands of the strongest of the Sternritter. Chapter 31. The Captain Commander's Fury. Find them. Wait. Ikaku Madarame finally recovered from his shock. The moment he heard the word Sternritter, his eyes lit up and he breathed out, hardly able to contain himself. You all heard that just now, right? He actually said it. He revealed who he is. Great. This enemy, who could no longer be called merely a monster, had finally given them a new clue. Ikaku let out a relieved sigh and wiped a thin sheen of sweat from his brow. Compared to the apocalyptic scenes in the footage, Grammy Thamo's identity and origin were what truly terrified him. The archive videos always jumped around. Some hints could be pieced together from different clips, but the constant edits and truncated playback raised more questions than they answered. For instance, Grammy's appearance. He'd never displayed spiritual pressure. He had no Zanpakuto, and he didn't show any Arrancar traits. He looked like an ordinary human boy. Yet behind that harmless face was an almost unimaginable power. More than the scale of the destruction, it was his origin that gnawed at Ikaku. Sternritter. What kind of organization is that? Why have I never heard of them? Ayasagawa Yumichika rubbed his temples, a headache settling in. Looking at the entire Soul Society, outside the Gotei 13, there were only things like the Kido Corps, the Onmitsukido, and the Technology Development Bureau. As for the human world, Yumichika hardly knew much of it, but he was certain a terror like Grammy could not have come from there. If so, disaster would have already overtaken both worlds. So who were the Sternritter? Stop talking and guessing already, Kenpachi growled from his usual spot in front of the wooden table, waving them off in his usual blunt way. Ikaku, Yumichika, get out of my way. Don't interfere with me enjoying my fight with the monster, got it? Kenpachi valued combat above almost everything. Unlike his two comrades, he never cared where Grammy came from. Sternritter? Who cares? The king of straightforward attacks only wanted to test his strength and turn the tide. 12th Division Barracks, Technology Development Bureau. The red alert strobe washed the building in an eerie crimson, like infrared light saturating every corridor. In the monitoring room on the first floor, the footage played on a translucent screen. Sternritter? The name made Mayuri's eyes widen behind his blue and white mask. He had been standing with his hands behind his back, observing coldly, until now. Captain, what's wrong? What happened? Akon was the first to notice Mayuri's lapse and asked cautiously. Mayuri let out a choked laugh that grew into something manic. His eyeballs darted wildly. The whites were shot with red veins. He curled his long nails, excitement bubbling over. Akon, weren't you curious where this monster came from? His voice was hollow, like a ghost whispering from the dark. Yes! What is it? Akon swallowed hard as a cold sweat broke out across his skin. Mayuri's expression was unnerving. What secret had driven him to this edge? No wonder I couldn't find any related data in the database, Mayuri said, laughing as if he'd discovered a new continent. It turns out they're people who vanished 1,000 years ago. People who disappeared 1,000 years ago? Akon trembled. If he hadn't worked alongside Mayuri for years and understood the mad scientist's nature, he might have fled then and there, afraid Mayuri would consign him to some grisly experiment. Mayuri didn't immediately elaborate. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and let out a cold, deep chuckle. As for that, he said, I think the Captain Commander ought to know more about this than I do, don't you? Squad 1 Barracks. The Captain Commander's reaction was far worse than Mayuri's. Impossible, he roared, and with a single, furious slam, the finely carved wooden table exploded into splinters. The old man's dark, purplish face flashed with a fury so fierce the entire office seemed to tremble. When he heard Sternritter, something sealed in his mind for 1,000 years tore open. Frame by frame, memories played like a reel of film. A millennium ago, under his command, the Gotei 13 and the pure-blooded Quincy had waged a decisive war for control of the Soul Society. In that cataclysmic battle, the Captain Commander had faced Yhwach and struck him down with the Bankai of Ryujin Jaka, leaving Yhwach breathless and unconscious. After that war, the pure-blooded Quincy fell from prominence, and their numbers were nearly wiped out. Over the centuries, the Captain Commander had let the memory fade, but it had never left him entirely. Seeing Graimi, who had wounded multiple Shinigami captains and stood arrogantly alongside the sun, had already angered him. The mention of Sternritter pushed him over the edge. Around him, Chojiro Sasakibe stood silent, not daring to speak. He knew too well how deep the old wound ran. The Captain Commander hated the idea of the pure-blooded Quincy returning. Chojiro. The Captain Commander's back straightened. Veins stood out on his arm as he gripped his wooden cane. His voice was low, solemn, and laced with murderous intent. Go to the Technology Development Bureau at once. Tell Mayuri, by any means necessary, he must find these hidden rats. The footage continued. Magma surged and cold currents ripped across the landscape. The final outcome of the disaster never fully played out before the recording cut off. Kenpachi's fate remained unknown. The scene snapped to a new location. The first image opened on Gremi Thimo, his voice cold and world-ending. I'm tired of this boring battle. It's time to make the entire Soul Society disappear. Subtitles crawled up the screen as the words echoed. Everyone watching stiffened. 11th Division. What does this mean? Is that how the last battle ends? Could Captain Ikaku Madarame began, imagining the worst, then rejected the thought. Captain, he's practically immortal. How could he be killed? Ayasagawa Yumichika's face grew dark as he gave a long, helpless sigh. Zaraki Kenpachi's fate was still unknown. None of them could say whether he lived or died. Still, the opening lines of the clip chilled Yumichika to the bone. On the screen, Zaraki himself didn't sound mournful. A grin split his face, revealing clean white teeth. Haha, Yachiru, looks like I'm missing too. Maybe we'll be buried together. There was no hint of sadness, only the bloodthirsty excitement of someone who welcomed the chance to die. Ikaku and Yumichika exchanged looks, their hearts twitching between dread and irritation. He's not even afraid of death, they muttered, rolling their eyes. Captain, carefree as ever, truly the strongest man in a combat division. Then the image clarified. A vast, mist-enshrouded sky filled the screen, white fog driven by a bitter cold. A low, grinding roar built and built until it threatened everyone's eardrums. In the 2nd Division, Omaida's mouth fell open, his cheeks puffed as he tried to keep from bolting. The previous natural disaster had nearly finished him, and only Suifeng's order to stay in the squad room kept him rooted. Look, Suifeng said, immaculate and serious, her eyes fixed on the top of the screen as the cold fog began to part to either side. Something was forcing its way through the clouds. Captain, it's not. An extraterrestrial meteor, is it? Omaida blurted. After all the bizarre phenomena they'd seen, it was not unthinkable that Gremi could imagine anything into being. Before he could finish, the sky exploded. Boom! The sound was like a world cracking open. The camera pulled back to reveal a colossal, pitch-black shadow cleaving the white mist, a meteor so huge it nearly filled the firmament. It blotted out the light and loomed over the Serete. The cold currents scattered. Fire spouted where the meteor's skin sheared the air. Friction set the upper atmosphere ablaze. An aura of annihilation rolled outward. A meteor? Omaida's jaw dropped so far it might have dislocated. How can he summon a meteor? Magma, cold winds, touch-based devastation, and now this. Gremi had conjured a meteor from beyond. Suifeng found her throat dry, each swallow a labor. Pride and decades of confidence crumbled under a single image. a meteor with a diameter large enough to darken the whole Seirete. The sky itself dimmed. It looked like the end of the world. Hueco mundo. Las noches fell silent. Even the usual bustle of the Arrancar and Fracción evaporated as the meteor thundered toward the Soul Society. Every one of them stood frozen, stunned. This, such a gigantic meteor. Even Stark's voice came out thin, his lazy demeanor shattered. He'd come merely to observe the captain's bankai, not to witness the descent of an apocalyptic rock. Ulquiorra watched in silence, recalling Gremmy's earlier self-introduction. The feeling it stirred in him was unlike anything since Aizen's arrival, an oppressive, suffocating force that pressed on his chest. Even knowing these were future scenes, distant from his current position, the footage made him feel present in the catastrophe, as if death could arrive at any step. Sailaporo stood pale and composed only in appearance. His voice took on the cadence of a prophet. In the future, because of the Sternritter's actions, the entire Soul Society will be utterly annihilated. At the thought, a dark elation ran through him. If that were so, it would be the greatest boon to Hueco Mundo. Chapter 33. Aizen's Ecstasy. Changing Plans. Human World. Urahara Shop. Chapter 32. Section 32. What the hell? This is ridiculous. This can't be real. Is this a sci-fi movie? The scene playing on the transparent screen was the same one being shown in Hueco Mundo and the Gotei 13. In Urahara's shop, Kurosaki Isshin and the two shop attendants wore expressions of stunned disbelief and shock. A gigantic extraterrestrial meteor, one murmured. It's going to destroy the entire Soul Society. If someone had told them that an hour earlier, they would have called the speaker mad. Seirete had stood for over 2,000 years. How could it be shattered by a meteor? But there it was, unfolding before their eyes, leaving all three of them speechless. Gentlemen, do you have any record of the Sternritter? Urahara Kisuke was the first to regain his composure. He steadied his voice and asked seriously. He searched his memory for anything about that unfamiliar organization, but came up with nothing. None, Isshin said without hesitation, not even in the Shiba family records from the past 100 years. As head of a branch of the Shiba clan, and once, by seniority, uncle to the Shiba siblings, Isshin had read the family's old chronicles. Though the family's decline had cost them many of their ancient texts, the remaining records still held many secrets. But he had not known about the 1,000-year blood war led by Yhwach. The Shiba records preserved only the last few centuries. It was no surprise then that he had no knowledge of it. Nor have I, Tessai Tsukabashi sighed, downcast. As the former great Taoist, he was well-read, yet he too could recall nothing relevant. Silence fell. Urahara's expression tightened. He did not doubt the authenticity of the footage. He knew the screens were showing things that would happen. Precisely because these events would occur, he intended to act. The human world, Hueco Mundo, and the Soul Society were all essential parts of the Soul Reaper cosmos. If the Soul Society was destroyed, the human world would be dragged into disaster, and everyone's way of life would change. They had to prevent this from happening, and the only way to do that was to find the mysterious Sternritter. In the video, the clouds split, and the meteor descended vertically, burning and glowing. Below, the Gotei 13 barracks lay in ruins, craters everywhere, and the Shinigami looked up in despair. A meteor! Damn it! What is going on? Against such a force, do we stand any chance? Some stood frozen, dazed, some were terror-stricken, others collapsed. All looked up at the seemingly endless colossal rock. The Shinigami of the Gotei 13 had lost their fighting spirit and had no thought of resistance. To ordinary Shinigami, that power was godlike, on a completely different scale. The scene froze as the meteor neared. Even when the final frame vanished and the transparent screen went black, the shocking image remained burned in everyone's minds. 5th Division Barracks. Slowly coming out of the shock, Ichimaru Gin narrowed his eyes and brought back his characteristic fox-like smile. "I'll admit," he said, "compared to Toshiro Hitsugaya's Heavenly Ice, this disaster Grammy Thimo created from pure imagination is more spectacular." He meant it. Ichimaru genuinely acknowledged Grammy's strength. The shock lasted only a moment before it faded. Being impressed didn't mean he was afraid. His Zanpakuto, Shinso, when released into Bankai, possessed infinite extension, able to cut targets 1,000 miles away, and its terrifying piercing speed exceeded 500 times the speed of sound. Jin was supremely confident he could shred that meteor into pieces before it struck. Amazing, Aizen said, his eyes lighting with interest. He wasn't indifferent any longer. Recently, the Arrancar and Espada had suffered setback after setback, leaving Aizen dismayed. One of his long pursuits, besides breaching dimensional limits, had been the Hogyoku to mass-produce Arrancar. But watching them perform so poorly had left him speechless. If his allies were too weak to even buy time, then even his own peak power might not withstand the combined assault of the Gotei 13, especially with a traitor like Ichimaru Gin lurking at his side. Fortunately for Aizen, Grammy Thamo's display changed that feeling of helplessness. In the fantasist, Aizen saw someone with the same calm confidence he admired in the Captain Commander. No matter the cost, they had to find the Stern Ritter. But while the outside world reeled from Grammy's spectacle, no one knew that within Serete's ordinary shadows there lay a hidden realm, a special world of ice and snow formed by millennia of accumulated Reiatsu. Inside that secret shadow domain, the Wandenreich's territory was an unbroken white expanse. At its center rose an ancient palace, like an ice crystal blossom on a precipice, dazzling amid the snow. Silver Frame City, the Wandenreich's capital. Within the largest palace of Silver Frame City, a large transparent screen displayed the same footage, the first scan through to the meteor's descent before the gathered Stern Ritter. Chapter 34. The fifth inventory begins. The atmosphere inside Silver Frame City was no less grave than in Hueco or Serete. Inside the magnificent palace, silence lay so thick that only breathing could be heard. Everyone. At the end of the palace corridor, Haschwalth stood with hooded lids, his blonde hair and blue eyes barely visible beneath the white cloak bearing a five-pointed star. As the Sternritter's highest-ranking officer, he was the supreme commander of Silver Frame City, while Yhwach slumbered, responsible for maintaining order there. "What did you think of the footage just now?" he asked coolly. Meanwhile, what was happening in Hueco and Soul Society was also playing out in the Shadow Realm. Through the light screen, the pure-blooded Quincy of the Wandenreich watched the previous ranking rounds unfold. When the names of Soul Reaper captains, Urahara Kisuke, Kuchiki Byakuya, Toshiro Hitsugaya, appeared in the first three rounds, the Sternritter met them with scorn and amusement. Most watched the footage as nothing more than entertainment. Then, Grammy Thamo showed up, and everything changed. "That's bad," Lilbaro said from the left steps, frowning. "Grammy hasn't even been to Soul Society. He's under special confinement by His Majesty. His showing up on that list exposes us." It was undeniable that any Sternritter being listed as a powerhouse would swell the pride of his comrades. But this was not mere vanity. The Wandenreich's plan, to start a war, invade Soul Society, and exact revenge on the Gotei 13, had been plotted in secret for over 1,000 years. Only the pure-blooded Quincy knew of it. Lil's worry was simple. If the Sternritter were exposed now, a millennium of hidden preparation could be ruined. "Yes," Robert Accutrone agreed anxiously. "Grammy's appearance is not good news. At least now the outside world knows the Sternritter exist." Haschwalth remained silent. After more than 900 years of recovery, Yhwach had finally regained heartbeat and consciousness, but he still needed time to return to full strength. At this critical juncture, any premature exposure of the Sternritter was a disaster for the Wandenreich. Of course, people were not a unified pillar. Factional disagreements persisted among the pure-blooded. In a corner of the palace, a burly, guard-like man with the Sword of Hope slung over his shoulder sneered. He had been given the saint inscription, M, Miracle, and the title of one of the Soul King's hearts. His power and endless miracle reserves gave him influence, and he felt no shame. "What's there to discuss?" he scoffed. "Isn't destroying Soul Society and eliminating the Gotei 13 what we've always wanted? We should be celebrating." "Exactly," Baz B added under his purple-red mohawk, defiant and hot-blooded. "This is a ranking of powerhouses. Of course the Sternritter will be on it." Kang Du, equally young and fierce, said coldly, his gaze sharp, "Let the world see the might of the pure-blooded Quincy." Back in the 4th Division, the video had paused, and the squadroom's atmosphere settled. Retsu Unohana sat at the wooden tea table, her willow-like brows tightly furrowed. She watched the light screen with a seriousness that rarely crossed her serene face. Isani Kotetsu hesitated before speaking. She didn't want to disturb the captain, but concern won out. "Captain, are you all right? Did you remember something?" she asked softly. Retsu blinked, then nodded with a complicated expression. "The Stern Ritter. I think they're connected to that war 1,000 years ago." "A 1,000-year war?" Izani said, puzzled. She had been in the Gotei for just over 200 years. The secrets of a millennium ago were largely beyond her knowledge. Retsu's features softened and darkened as images from the past stirred. "It's a long story, but in short, those were bloody battles too horrific to dwell on." The memory pulled at her. Once, she had been the first Kenpachi, a raging force in Soul Society. In that war, she had slaughtered pure-blooded Quincy by the dozens. 1,000 years had changed her. The monster who sought only combat had become a healer who saved lives. Still, the old memories throbbed under the surface. "We can't let them reappear unchecked," Izani whispered, thinking of the enormous meteor in the footage. "If that happens, the Captain Commander won't just sit by, will he?" Retsu inclined her head slightly. Since the video showed the future, and given the commander's hatred for the pure-blooded Quincy, he would act to prevent it. The paused footage resumed, the familiar background music returned, and a new subtitle appeared. No. 11. King of Basic Attacks. Zaraki Kenpachi. Zaraki Kenpachi? Retsu's voice betrayed surprise. In the previous round, seeing Kenpachi buried beneath that cataclysm had led Asane to assume he had died against Greimi Thamo. Asane's eyes widened. But he was buried in that natural disaster. I thought he might have sacrificed himself. Retsu's expression shifted to one of fierce hope. There's a chance he didn't die. Maybe he countered and killed his opponent. A memory sparked within her. The chaotic Kenpachi district, where long ago the first Kenpachi had sought an opponent who could sate her bloodlust. There, she had found the young Zaraki and seen his monstrous strength. In Retsu's heart, Zaraki was the one true bearer of the Kenpachi name. The thought that he might have survived, even turned the tide, filled her with a bright, sudden light. "He's truly ruthless," she murmured, recalling the warrior she had once faced and later saved the title for. Issei nodded, sharing the silent hope. The ranking resumed. When the scene resumed, the first thing that met the eye was a vast expanse of white desert and the metallic clash of blades. A tall cloud of dust shot into the air. As the camera zoomed in on the center of that empty plain, two figures locked in combat slowly came into focus. Ha! An Arrancar, with that so-called strongest hero and those arms that multiply with each cut. This is getting good. Zaraki Kenpachi grinned, holding his Zanpakuto in one hand, laughing like a beast, thrilled by the fight. Opposite him stood Neutra, released into Santa Teresa, his 6 insect-like segmented arms, each wielding a razor-sharp crescent scythe. His eyes narrowed, a thin line of fury drawn across his face. Back at Las Noches, the moment the camera cut to a close-up of Neutra, the formerly hushed halls erupted. The Arrancar watched like a gathered jury. Grimjow, perched where he always liked to inject trouble, was the first to taunt him. "Tsk! Look at Neutra." Grimjow sneered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What's with that look? He's twitching with anxiety. Could it be he's being pushed around by a Shinigami?" "He's already released his resurrection," another voice murmured. "But he doesn't look confident at all." Grimjow raised his voice on purpose, letting the words roll through Las Noches like oil on water. He was savoring the moment. "Yeah, if you look at the subtitles, whose name's up there? Not Neutra." That cut deep. Neutra's face flushed with heat. Anger and humiliation fought on his features as he bared his teeth. "Grimjow, shut up. Stop stirring things, or I'll kill you." "Is that so?" Grimjow shrugged. "Then how do you explain the subtitles? Why isn't your name on them?" Neutra found himself at a loss. The realization gnawed at him. On the footage, the spotlight belonged to the Shinigami, Zaraki Kenpachi. He had clung to the hope that his famed hero and super regeneration would earn him recognition, but now it looked as if he would only be another backdrop, a foil to showcase someone else's strength. The Arrancar around him whispered and speculated. Earlier defeats, Halibel's fall, Zomari's display, had already eroded their blind confidence. Now it felt like a pattern. The following footage only confirmed their worst fears. Neutra lashed out with a flurry of slashes, his crescent scythes roaring through the air. "Die, you trash Shinigami," he howled, voice raw. "If one cut won't do it, I'll cut you again. I won't believe you'll never fall." He drove himself into a frenzy, each arm swinging as though he could vent every ounce of humiliation and rage through steel. Bloodshot-eyed, he attacked like a man possessed. "Ha ha ha!" came Zaraki's reply, louder, crazier. "Come on, cut me all you want. If you can kill me, even better. I won't fall with those soft cuts of yours. Even 10,000 slashes won't do it." Blood soaked his Shihakusho and Captain's Haori. He was a walking crimson smear, yet with every deeper slash his smile grew wider, his excitement sharpened. To anyone watching, the scene was unnerving. A man who seemed to welcome pain, who thrummed on it like a drug. If he truly did feel the agony, he hid it. Instead, the wounds seemed to feed him. Las Noches fell silent with a different sensation, spine-tingling discomfort and a strange kind of awe. Even the Arrancar, who had slaughtered countless foes, felt unsettled by Zaraki's expression. Here was a Shinigami who appeared not merely able to endure, but to revel in being cut, an apparent masochist who seemed almost immortal. Yami, normally the shortest-tempered of them all, muttered in a rare, subdued tone, "This Shinigami, he's twisted." Torturing others was one thing. Torturing oneself and enjoying it was another order of perversity. Stark leaned over on the high platform, exhaled with a long, helpless sigh. "An immortal body, huh? These Shinigami captains keep getting stranger." For the Arrancar, watching Zomari, Halibel, and now Neutra fade into the background, the thought pressed uncomfortably. Were they destined to be nothing more than stepping stones for the Shinigami? Meanwhile, the scene playing back in the Seirete couldn't have been more different. Inside the 11th Division barracks, where a transparent light screen streamed the broadcast, the mood was exuberant. Yachiru, Ikkaku, and Yumichika crowded around, shouting and cheering. They weren't worried about Kenpachi's wounds. They were thrilled to see their captain in the thick of battle, relishing it. "Captain, you live up to your name. Never fall," one of them yelled. "He must be hating every second, right, Captain?" Zaraki, watching himself on the screen, felt no pang of fear. If anything, he was mildly annoyed. He'd hoped for a better entrance, but the footage matched his own assessment. "He swings like a woman," he said, frowning at the screen. "Those slashes are soft, just tickling me." Chapter 35, Section 35. The confident voice rang out without a trace of doubt. Zaraki Kenpachi's contempt was sincere. Yes, whether now or in the future, he still thought Neutra was weak. The title, Strongest Hero, sounded impressive, but the essence of a battle between Shinigami is the clash of Reiatsu. Durability and the lethality of a slash ultimately depend on the difference in spiritual pressure. In other words, the strongest hero is only one factor. Neutra's toughness and his slash's deadliness still depended on the size of his Reiatsu. And Zaraki Kenpachi was a Reiatsu monster, second only to Aizen and the Captain Commander within the Gotei 13. So whether attacking or defending, Neutra was bound to be crushed. 6th Division. Is it that same barbaric fighting style again? It seems even in the future Zaraki Kenpachi hasn't changed at all. Kuchiki Byakuya watched the video with his dark eyes, a look of pure disgust on his usually unreadable face. He didn't dislike Kenpachi as a person, he despised that reckless, self-destructive way of fighting. Who else but Kenpachi would take pleasure in getting cut? It was absurd. "Captain, I actually think his immortality looks impressive," Abarai Renji said from the side, admiration in his voice. The redhead grew more and more absorbed. If he could never be killed like Kenpachi, surely Rukia would look at him differently. The thought made him almost giddy. Wandenreich, inside Silver Frame City. "Shh, immortality? What's so special about that? It doesn't put him above Gramy Themo," Valkyrie spat. To someone who wielded the power of miracle, immortality was a trivial thing. "I agree," Squad Zero Captain Lil Barrow nodded. "No matter how durable he is, he's just passively taking hits. If he doesn't have corresponding destructive power, he doesn't deserve a high rank." The Stern Ritter were all cheats in their own way. As they watched the bloody footage of Zaraki being hacked apart, their faces remained impassive. To them, it was a minor skirmish compared to their Shrift powers. Kenpachi's immortality didn't matter. Unless he could show overwhelming killing power. The video kept playing. Zing, Neutra didn't know how many times he'd slashed. After delivering the last blow with everything he had, he let his arm fall, panting. His wrist felt numb from the effort. What filled him with despair, though, was that Zaraki Kenpachi still stood, standing tall, barely scratched beyond a few fresh bloodstains, and his Reiatsu had only grown stronger. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" Veins bulged on Neutra's forehead as he roared. The sound waves scattered the dust around them. Unable to cut Kenpachi down after so long, his mind began to crack. Across from him, with dust swirling between them, Zaraki leisurely rested his Zanpakuto on his shoulders and shook his head in mock disappointment. "Hey, Espada, are you giving up already? That's not how a man should act. Quick, pick up your scythe again and slash my head with everything you've got." There was no mockery, no arrogance, only genuine dissatisfaction. Kenpachi wanted the thrill of being cut. Neutra's surrender deprived him of that pleasure. Hueco mundo. "Damn it! These images must be fake. I am the strongest Espada. I can't be humiliated by a Shinigami." Neutra's rage echoed through Las Noches, his teeth grinding as he screamed. The whole army had watched the video, everyone who heard him boast of being the strongest Espada. Now that humiliating footage was public. The sting of shame burned like salt in his wounds. He wished he could die. But the battle wasn't over, and what came next would plunge him into deeper despair. In the video, Kenpachi sighed. "How boring," he muttered as Neutra hesitated. With a trace of reluctance, he raised his Zanpakuto and asked, almost disdainfully, "Arrancar, do you know why I always fight with one hand?" "I don't have to answer you," Neutra shrieked, fury peaking. "Is that so? Then I'll tell you anyway." Kenpachi's expression turned solemn. He set the chipped blade horizontally in front of him and continued, half mocking himself. "When I first joined the Gotei 13, the old man put me through special training, old-fashioned stuff like kendo." Swish, he swung the sword hard, pointing the tip at Neutra. "Do you know, in kendo, wielding the sword with both hands is much more powerful than with one." The moment he finished the sentence, his other hand came to the hilt. He slowly raised the sword above his head. Neutra's pupils constricted. A sudden, terrifying sense of life or death surged through him. Instinctively, he swung his severed arm, grabbed his crescent scythe, leapt up, and slashed at Kenpachi, desperate to stop that sword from falling. They have to stop him before that sword comes down. Something inside screamed that he had to stop that beast of a man. But Kenpachi's eyes were calm, a wild light glinting within them. "It seems you still don't quite understand." As the Zanpakuto paused over his head, Kenpachi took both hands on the hilt and brought it down with brutal force. One sword style, Iaido. Chapter 37. Great. Kenpachi is still alive. Two-handed kendo. One sword style, Iaido slash. For once, Zaraki Kenpachi's eyes were solemn. He took hold of his sword with both hands and drove it forward with everything he had. Boom! A towering pillar of golden Reiatsu erupted, a column of light that tore through the white sand and roared skyward like a leviathan swallowing the heavens. Clouds exploded. The earth trembled. The desert itself seemed on the verge of collapse. And that was only the force released as the two-handed kendo began. Las Noches. The sound of swallowed saliva echoed around the halls. The inner chamber, which had only just grown a little lively under Grimjo's lead, fell silent again. Such terrifying Reiatsu. The Arrancar stared at the golden light spilling across the screens in stunned silence. None of them had imagined that Zaraki Kenpachi, simply by gripping his sword with two hands, could generate such devastating power. Kendo? What is this? Why don't I get this effect? Grimjo's face froze. The arm half shoved into his pocket trembled. Among the Espada, he was the one most used to fighting with his Zanpakuto. Normally, he would swing arrogantly with one hand, only using both hands when pressed. But he could not remember ever doubling his slash's power just by holding the hilt with two hands. How could that be? The gap is too big. Neutra will definitely lose. Halibel's voice, muffled behind her high white collar, came out shaken. She stared at the screen, emerald eyes reflecting the collapsing desert, heart-pounding. The other Vasto Lord, Stark, Baragan, and Ulquiorra, were equally aghast at the magnitude of the two-handed kendo's output, and that was just a normal slash. It was impossible to gauge how vast Kenpachi's Reiatsu truly was. Shock, however, did not last long among the Arrancar. Grimjo quickly recovered and, narrowing his eyes at a brooding Neutra, sneered, "Heh heh, Neutra, do you still have the face to argue with me now?" The Leopard King grinned, teeth bared, savoring his rival's humiliation. The fate of comrades mattered little to Grimjo. Neutra trembled with fury, his flushed face darkened, veins standing out. No one in that world was unafraid of death, not even the cruelest Espada. Watching himself on the screen about to be killed drove Neutra to the edge of madness. At last, as the 100-meter-high sandstorm was torn apart, the substantial golden Reiatsu dispersed the shredded clouds and drove an incomparably sharp sword chi down like a waterfall from the sky. Boom! The force of the impact made the cameras shake violently. Golden streams of light overlapped, blasting open one fissure after another in the earth, and then swallowed Neutra's figure. The feed ended there. The realistic imaging tech delivered the most authentic feedback to every viewer. First Division. The Captain Commander leaned on his wooden cane, a trace of relief crossing his deep, weathered eyes. He remembered teaching Kenpachi Kendo in the old dojo years ago. The anger that had swelled from the exposure of the pure-blood Quincy eased a little at the sight. "Captain Commander." Seeing his expression soften, Chojiro Sasakibe seized the moment to flatter him. "Captain Kenpachi's performance proves your judgment of people back then was right. However," Chojiro paused, then continued, "I just noticed the number on the Espada killed by the two-handed Kendo was 5. It looks like the Espada rankings are becoming clearer." As vice captain of the First Division and the Captain Commander's reliable aide, Chojiro had been carefully logging details during the video review and relaying them to the Technology Development Bureau. So far, the footage had revealed the identities: 10th, Yami; 7th, Zomari; 5th, Neutra; and the third ranked was Halabel. The future scenes were surfacing the Espada one by one. Their personalities, physiques, and their powers after resurrection were being recorded. That's right," the Captain Commander agreed calmly. "Aside from the third-ranked Espada, whose ability to manipulate ocean currents is somewhat decent, none of the others are a real threat." It sounded prideful, but that was his honest thought. As the strongest Shinigami in 1,000 years, he had every reason to look down on the Espada. "Chojiro," he changed the subject, growing solemn. "More than the Arankar, what concerns me is the Stern Ritter. About that fight with the Visionary, I want to know, was Zaraki Kenpachi still alive in that battle?" At that moment, as the Captain Commander and the old Western man talked, the dark screen flared to life again. New battle footage appeared. Boom. Crack. The violent storm sounds from before returned, followed by eruptions of scorching magma and sheets of freezing wind. The footage seemed to rewind and replay that confrontation. The sight of such natural disasters triggered shock across the Soul Society. 11th Division. A tense silence filled the squad office. A moment ago, everyone had been swept up by Kenpachi's display. Now, with those cataclysmic scenes on the screen, the mood shifted. This looks familiar." Ikkaku Madarame scratched his bald head, baffled. "Idiot, it's not like, it is the battle from before." Ayasagawa Yumichika snapped, rolling his Byakugan in disdain. Chapter 37, Section 37. From the moment the footage was released, he couldn't help getting emotional. After all, the subject of this round's inventory was Captain Kenpachi. That confirmed Zaraki Kenpachi had survived his battle with Gremi Thimo. Right. I remember now, it was that battle," Ikkaku Madarame cried, practically vibrating with excitement. "Looks like Captain Kenpachi's about to make a comeback." Expectation and reverence flared in Ikkaku's eyes. Even when Kenpachi had been crushed by that massive, otherworldly construct in the previous inventory, he'd never believed the man was gone. How could someone who inspired that kind of loyalty simply die? "Yes! He's still alive!" Yachiru cheered, twirling with glee. Sure enough, the next frame showed the demon-like figure returning to the fray in triumph. Zaraki Kenpachi stood with his Zanpakuto resting on his shoulder, looking up casually. His wild gaze was brimming with absolute confidence. "Heh, a disaster, you say? I can hack apart something like that with a single swing." Chapter 38, Zaraki Kenpachi's Shikai. A curl of disdain lifted one corner of his mouth. Zanpakuto on his shoulder, Kenpachi watched the sky with an unreadable face as searing magma and bone-chilling cold spread outward across his view. The image matched the end of his previous battle, but the difference was clear. Kenpachi's aura now radiated confidence and raw power, not the resignation of a man on the brink of death. Inside Silver Frame City, the stern Ritter watching the screens bristled. "What's with that arrogant look?" one of them sneered. Was he looking down on them? "How dare he?" Valkyrie snorted. So the tide turned in this fight. No wonder that ferocious-looking Shinigami made the list. Infuriating. Among the pure-blood Quincy present, Valkyrie hated the Shinigami the most. If Hashwalth hadn't held him back, he would have ripped through the Shadow Realm to face Kenpachi right then. Basby's smug expression softened as well. Though the footage still showed Kenpachi facing a natural disaster, Basby had a strong intuition. Kenpachi would handle it. Sure enough, the next moment the footage continued. Kenpachi raised his Zanpakuto high and swung. Clang. No flashy techniques, just an ordinary slash. One strike, and a golden pressure of Reiatsu tore through heaven and earth. The force was so immense it took on form, coalescing into a golden skull that roared like a demon. In the 4th division, Isane Kotetsu was stunned. So strong. Compared to now, future Kenpachi's Reiatsu level seems to have advanced a realm. If Retsu hadn't been holding her up, her legs would have given out. Even through the light screen, the tangible pressure made it hard to breathe. Retsu Nohana smiled, hair blown back by the broadcasted gale of Reiatsu, relief softening her features. If not for her battle with Kenpachi, he wouldn't have sealed his power. Seeing him reclaim his former might reassured her that she hadn't been mistaken about him back then. On the screen, the destructive pair of magma and absolute zero cold had already wrapped around Kenpachi, seemingly about to consume him. Then, boom, the natural disaster that had terrified so many was scattered and erased by that single golden slash. It vanished without a trace. No way. He cleared it that easily? He only slashed once. Shouts echoed through Las Noches as the Arrancar watched the sky on the video clear. The Espada and their subordinates were collectively stunned. Could Reiatsu manifest physically like that? It seemed impossible. In the 2nd Division office, Omaida whooped, completely enthralled as he imagined himself as Kenpachi, one sword strike piercing the sky, crushing everything with sheer spiritual pressure. The raw masculinity on display satisfied him immensely. Soifon, however, only grew more discouraged. Urahara Kisuke had appeared first and was already crossed off the list. Then 3 Shinigami captains had been revealed: Kuchiki Byakuya, Toshiro Hitsugaya, and now Zaraki Kenpachi. Soifon knew that, aside from those 3, few of the remaining Gotei 13 captains were weaker than her. Tosen Kaname? Komamura Sajin? Beyond those 2, she couldn't be sure she was stronger than the rest. The more the inventory progressed, the fewer spots would remain. Did that mean her future self had stagnated and been left behind by the others? Section 38, I can't stand it. This is absolutely unacceptable. 5th Division. Underground base. Facing the storm of spiritual pressure that tore through the light barrier, Gin Ichimaru eased his eyes open, revealing his pale blue irises. From the bottom of his heart, he said, "Humph, just as I thought. Zaraki Kenpachi isn't dead at all. He's like an unkillable cockroach." Whether it had been his fight with Neutra or now, Zaraki Kenpachi always managed a reversal with terrifying ease. His monstrous vitality and overwhelming Reiatsu were frightening. "Jin, don't be so quick to judge. You seem to forget this battle isn't over yet," Sosuke Aizen said flatly. "Ah, right. Captain Aizen is right." Gin's smile froze as a cold sweat prickled his back. He remembered the previous footage, that enormous meteor. There was no way Reiatsu alone could destroy something of that scale. How would Kenpachi deal with it? At that moment, the screen skipped forward as it had before. The next scene that appeared was the one that had already played once. Boom! A deafening roar. The air shuddered, heat from air friction flared as a black shadow gradually swallowed the sky and blotted out the sun. The whole Seirete was engulfed in the firelight. "It's here! That scene again!" Gin's eyes glittered with anticipation. Even the second viewing didn't dull the shock. Beside him, Kaname Tosen, though blind, trembled, reacting to the Reiatsu and the image's sensory impact. Zaraki Kenpachi, what will he do? Aizen watched the screen without blinking. The camera zoomed in, focusing on Kenpachi. As before, the so-called king of basic attacks showed no hint of panic, only feral excitement. "Meteor, how thrilling! I've never cut something like that before." He grabbed his sword and leapt. The hulking man shot into the air, charging at a meteor tens of thousands of times larger than himself. At the same time, he bellowed the release command for his Zanpakuto. Devour Nozarashi! Although Kenpachi's body had shrunk to a speck against the meteor by the distant camera, his roar carried, scattering clouds, shaking the air, and making the light curtain shiver. The sound reached every viewer clearly and sent another shock through everyone watching. Hueco Mundo. Wait, did I hear that right? Did that monster just shout, Shikai? Stark's pupils widened as his worldview threatened to collapse. After witnessing the two recent fights, Zaraki Kenpachi no longer looked like a mere Shinigami to him. He was a complete force of nature. And now this. The colossal Reiatsu that could rattle the heavens wasn't even Kenpachi's limit. It was only his starting point. He hadn't even used his Shikai. It was unbearable to contemplate. The Skull Emperor was speechless. His expression had gone beyond ugly. Even without releasing his Zanpakuto, Kenpachi's slashes and raw Reiatsu could crush everything in his path. There were no rules left. With power like that, and he's not even in the top 10, can you imagine what the ones above him must be like? Halibel's complexion kept changing. She trembled, unwilling to think further. The rest of the Espada were similarly stunned. Grimjo silent, Neutra withdrawn, Yami unwilling to meet the screen. The once arrogant Espada all went quiet. Las Noches fell utterly silent. 5th Division. Underground chamber. Huh, no way. Kenpachi can use Shikai? Gin's grin stiffened. The realization felt unreal. Ever since he joined the Gotei 13, Kenpachi's brutally direct style and his unstoppable slashes had earned him the title King of Basic Attacks. It had become a consensus among the Soul Reapers, both officers and captains, that Captain Kenpachi Zanpakuto has no Shikai. He fights only with Reiatsu and slashes. And now Kenpachi had shouted a Shikai release command. What did it mean? It's surprising, but it's good news. Aizen's cool demeanor had shifted. His eyes held a fervent gleam. If even Zaraki Kenpachi can break his limits, then the future holds infinite possibilities. For example, the Hogyoku. Aizen's lips curved into that sly, confident smile. If Kenpachi could transcend his limits, then Aizen's own plans, using the Hogyoku to break past the pinnacle of Shinigami, seemed closer to fruition. 11th Division. Waha! Yachiru bounded into Kenpachi's arms with a delighted leap. Little Blade, this is amazing. I didn't think your future self would awaken his Shikai. Yes, congratulations, Captain. You finally won't be limited to monotonous basic attacks. Ikkaku Madarame grinned, white teeth flashing. I can't wait to see what your Shikai does. Just hearing Kenpachi's roar sent a thrill through Ayasagawa Yumichika, as if something in him might ignite. Such momentum had to mean a sky-defying ability, didn't it? Ha! It's a big surprise. I never expected my Zanpakuto to wake up either. Zaraki Kenpachi growled happily. He'd kept the persona of the king of basic attacks for decades, but that didn't mean he wanted to be stuck, using only basic slashes forever. If his Zanpakuto's Shikai let him enjoy battle even more, he was all for it. But Ikkaku frowned, thinking it over. Nozarashi, the name's odd. I can't guess what kind of ability it'll be. It didn't seem to lean toward any particular attribute. Was it more of a physical attack type? Idiot, did you forget? Yachiru perched on Zaraki Kenpachi's shoulder, holding up a finger and speaking with mock gravity. A Zanpakuto's ability usually reflects its owner's personality. Nozarashi has to be a straight-up attack-type Zanpakuto. It makes sense, Ikkaku Madarame murmured, nodding thoughtfully. If it was an attack-type blade, it fit the king of basic attacks perfectly. As the golden Reiatsu that had scattered the clouds slowly faded, the long blade in Zaraki Kenpachi's hand, once nicked and battered, changed completely. The blade swelled to an enormous size. The tsuba became a three-dimensional polygon. The hilt was wrapped in strips of white cloth. The sword itself dwarfed Zangetsu by a factor of 10. In short, Zaraki Kenpachi's Zanpakuto had become a gigantic butcher-like cleaver, raw in both size and presence, more imposing than any other. Ha! After releasing his Shikai, Kenpachi's scarred face flushed with excitement. His fighting spirit roared. Fantasy kid, this is my first time using Shikai. I hope your meteorite's sturdy enough. He said it as if the meteorite were nothing, and then he proved it. With the same blunt simplicity he always used, Kenpachi hunched his shoulder, gripped the blade with one hand, and swung it down with a roar. One slash. A single, massive strike severed heaven and earth. When the blade met the meteorite's edge, it moved through as if there were no resistance at all. Under everyone's eyes, the enormous space rock split cleanly in two, like slicing tofu. The king of straightforward attacks, one swing, one kill. Time itself seemed to hold its breath as Nozarashi sliced the meteorite. The blade, enormous and golden, cut so high that it momentarily eclipsed the sun, the broadcast filled with thunderous, cinematic percussion as the camera locked onto the blade. In that dim, shadowed sky, the only clear image was Nozarashi's edge and the meteorite fracturing apart. The visual impact was immediate. So cool! Captain Kenpachi actually cut the star in one strike. He saved everyone. He saved the Soul Society. He's the hero of the Gotei 13. Inside the 2nd Division barracks, Omaeda let out an ecstatic yell. His cheeks flushed as he bounced with excitement, his heavy frame nearly collapsing the floorboards. Even Sui Feng, usually stern and unflappable, sat stunned and speechless, eyes wide at the display. "It's terrifying. Zaraki Kenpachi is unreal," she whispered, unnerved. Watching the meteorite split under that golden slash, she found herself doubting. If she'd gone up there relying on Shunpo, would she have been knocked out by the heat? Even if she had used Bankai, Jakuo Raikoben, her trump card, maybe it wouldn't have been able to destroy the thing. Incredible. Captain Kenpachi truly is an eye-opener. Across the 13th Division, Kyoraku Shunsui, wrapped in his flowered kimono, stared at the screen with slow amazement, his mouth slightly open. Jushiro Ukitake, pale and often frail, looked flushed with excitement, the teacup in his hands trembling as he gripped it. In the human world, a group of vizards clustered in an abandoned warehouse cursed and howled at the sight. They were used to the rough edges of battle, but even they were shaken. A madman had performed a deed most heroes only dreamed of. He'd cut a meteorite apart. Envy and irritation flared in equal measure. Everyone wanted to be a savior at least once, and here the role had fallen to someone so unrefined. In the 1st Division, Chojiro Sasakibe exhaled for the first time since the threat had loomed. Once the meteorite was destroyed and the danger lifted, he turned to the captain commander with a relieved, respectful smile. The worry that had nagged at the commander for days, memories of the 1,000-year blood war returning, dissipated when he saw Kenpachi's slash. The old man's tense expression eased, his guarded gaze brightened like a torch relit. Humph. He didn't need to answer. The deep breath he let out said it all. For all their faults, the Gotei 13 still had defenders. Kenpachi had, for the moment, restored hope. Yes, the image of the blade cutting a star had rekindled the captain commander's confidence. As long as the Gotei prepared carefully, the return of the pureblood Quincy could be prevented. Back in the 11th Division, Kenpachi's #1 fan applauded wildly. Yachiru cheered and clapped her small hands together, bright-eyed and delighted. Chapter 40. Section 40. That's right. My blood's boiling. I wish I could take the captain's place and be the one to cut down the stars. Even with his bald head, Ikaku Madarame's hair stood on end. He gripped his Zanpakuto so hard his whole body trembled. I think, when this video airs, countless people will be lining up to join the combat divisions, right? Ayasagawa Yumichika smiled, pride curling his lips. The 11th Division had always been one of the Gotei 13's most popular units, not only for their creed of combat above all, but also because of Zaraki Kenpachi's magnetic, violent charm. A new slogan practically wrote itself. Do you want to be a savior? Don't hesitate. Join the combat divisions. One day you too will be a superstar, admired by all, just like Captain Kenpachi. Hueco Mundo. Dead silence. The palace lay as still as stagnant water. Shock after shock left the Arrancar army numb. No more questions, no exclamations. Their morale had simply collapsed under the staggering gap in power. Sigh! Stark let out a heavy breath. He looked as if he had aged 100 years overnight. His middle-aged face was clouded in gloom. Defeat hung in his expression. I say, why don't we all just lie low? The Shinigami are each more abnormal than the next. If we invade Soul Society now, we'd simply be marching to our deaths. As head of the Espada, he shouldn't have been so desolate. Given Stark's usual temperament, such words were out of character. But what Zaraki Kenpachi had just done was simply too shocking. Stark could only surrender to despair. Silence answered him. Even the most arrogant Baragan seemed to have lost his voice. Stark was right. Lying low wasn't shameful. Hiding in Hueco Mundo, sunning beneath that fake sun when you had the chance, wasn't that a comfortable life? Why go provoke the Shinigami if you didn't have to? Lord Aizen, you can die whenever you like. We Arankar still want to live a few more years. Chapter 41. Little White and Big White. So we're that strong? The three realms trembled. The human world, Hueco Mundo, Soul Society, all who saw the transparent display were stunned by Zaraki Kenpachi's colossal strength. The title, King of Basic Attacks, felt well-earned, and his 11th place ranking now seemed undisputed. But just as everyone assumed the ranking was finished, the screen faded, reappeared, and no new subtitle came up. It was as if the broadcast hinted that the round hadn't ended yet. What's happening? According to the previous rounds, a new ranking should start by now. Under his light purple hair, Ichimaru Jin frowned in confusion. It made no sense. Zaraki's display should have been definitive. With no Zarashi revealed, Kenpachi had drawn enough attention and glory, so why wasn't the next round beginning? Could the broadcast have skipped a tape? That kind of low-level malfunction shouldn't happen. Beside him, Tosen Kaname, still near silent from repeated shock, spoke with a mixture of surprise and dread. Is it possible the ranking hasn't finished? Zaraki Kenpachi hasn't shown all his power? What? Ichimaru's expression shifted instantly. He forced the words out. No, that can't be, right? Even in Shikai, Zaraki Kenpachi is monstrous. Could he awaken Bankai in the future? By the end, his voice was shaking. The slitted eyes beneath his bangs brimmed with fear. If Shikai was this terrifying, what would Bankai look like? Could one swing cut Soul Society in two? The thought made him dizzy. Just as Ichimaru began to go numb, the screen flickered. Static swarmed the image and a new scene began to load. Boom! Boom! Before the picture fully recovered from darkness, ear-splitting explosions roared. It's really not over yet? This time, it wasn't only Ichimaru and Tosen. Even Aizen's expression shifted. Though he couldn't see the image yet, the ferocity of the sounds made him instinctively suspect another catastrophic battle was being broadcast. After all, Gremmy's summoned meteor nearly destroyed the Seireitai. Could Soul Society suffer a second annihilation? What came next shocked them all. The new image resolved into a scene of vast, Western-style buildings, clearly unlike the Seireitai. Most were heavily damaged. The area had become a battlefield. Where is this? I don't recognize it. Ichimaru's pupils widened. The sudden, unfamiliar setting threw him off balance. Aizen was silent. A flicker of unease crossed his ink-dark eyes. This was the second time he felt the future slipping from his grasp. After seeing the Sternritter, now this. Lord Aizen, could it be the human world? Tosen ventured from behind. The human world wasn't just Karakura. There were western regions, too. Possible, but unlikely. Aizen shook his head, voice cool. The human world was less stable than Hueco Mundo or Soul Society. Repeatedly manifesting overwhelming spiritual pressure could cause it to collapse. Captain-level Shinigami were rarely allowed into the human world without explicit orders, and even then, part of their Ryatsu had to be sealed before passing through the Senkaimon. Displaying such an intense battle there would be irresponsible. Could it be? Is this the pureblood Quincy's stronghold?